All right, Seattle certainly coming to the big screen, the big stage in 21-22. As we found out in the press conference, same expansion draft rules as the Vegas Golden Knights. And Vegas, of course, we should mention, exempt. They will not participate. They will not lose any players in the expansion draft coming up. Just to refresh your memory, they have to select one player from each club except Vegas. Now, the clubs, they have two options for protecting their players. You can protect 7 forwards, 3 D-men, and a goaltender, or 8 skaters in total, forward and defensemen, however you want to combine it, and 1 goaltender. What do you make of this and the format? Obviously, they weren't going to go back a step from what we saw in Vegas. But if you're one of those 30 teams participating in this draft and losing one of your players, did you learn something from the way it went with Vegas now moving forward for when Seattle takes their turn?
Yes. I think that the fact that this process played out and we saw how it worked on paper, we saw it announced, and then we saw what Vegas was able to do with their roster and the additional things they were able to get through various leverage moves by George McPhee. Everybody kind of knows how this works now, and everybody has seen the teams that made some deals that maybe weren't favorable deals for them. Minnesota Wild, for example, ended up losing a couple of players in the idea of trying to protect somebody on their defense. They ended up making some moves and traded where they lose an Alex Tuck, they lose an Eric Haula, both of whom were really good players for the Vegas Golden Knights.
Panthers
last year,
well.
and moving forward, the Florida Panthers, the same thing. The Columbus Blue Jackets made a couple of moves like that. So I think everybody has seen this play out now. They will have a little bit better idea of how they're going to approach it, and it'll be a real challenge for Seattle. I mean, George McPhee really worked the room, so to speak, really well to find just the leverage points in different teams, and was able to access probably more players and more assets than we probably thought he could get. So it'll be a challenge for the group in Seattle. We know Dave Tippett is involved in some way with this group. They will eventually at some point hire a general manager and a complete hockey staff, and those guys will be tasked with the idea of going out and trying to put together a list and really looking at each roster and seeing where teams are vulnerable or what guys might be available. And I think it goes back to the first point, is that they will have to determine who they want to be as a team. And I've said this over and over for years, as all these sports franchises, who are we as a team? Because once you make that decision, then you can go out and bring in the players that fit who you want to be. And I think Vegas did that very well. They wanted to be fast and entertaining. They went out and got fast and entertaining type players, and it worked out really well for them. So they'll have to make that decision in Seattle, but they got a little time to work on, a little extra time, but it won't be as easy because the general managers, everybody has seen this act play out, and they're going to have a little bit of a different approach.
Is that the blueprint nowadays? Speed, fast? I mean,
absolutely.
You come in, you don't have to retool on the fly. You get the clean canvas, and you get to be whatever you want your identity to be. If you were a GM in this decision, what is the identity of Seattle if you want to start?
You've got to be able to be fast now. You've got to be able to play with speed. I mean, and the thing that's going to be really important for the general manager and the hockey group in Seattle when they get in place is to really be in tune with what is going on in the league. Because if you're not, you miss the subtle changes. The league went from a bigger, tougher league to a faster league. There
Especially
have been rule
in that
changes.
division in the Pacific.
Exactly. There are things that take place year in and year out. So the league will be different when they come into it in 21-22 than it is now. And so they'll have to be aware of all those little changes and what the trends are moving forward so they can identify, again, what makes the most sense for them. But once they do that, then they can go out and get the type of players they need. But I would imagine it is going to continue to be speed, and more speed, but it'll be up to them to keep a close eye on the trends and where we are going as a league.
Well, let's talk about the expansion draft, because we are finally going to find out what this team will look like as the Seattle Kraken just pick and choose who they want to take off of all of the other 31 teams in the National Hockey League. But leading up to the expansion draft, we had Sam Cosentino on earlier. He talked about maybe some things moving around ahead of both drafts. Do you think there's any situations where we could see deals made for goaltenders? Let's start there, because we had some situations this year with, teams that had 3 good goaltenders on their rosters.
Yeah, there'll be all kinds of little conversations and deals that get made, because there's a lot of teams that are in a situation, as you mentioned, they have to figure out who they are going to leave unprotected, and maybe they don't want to leave those particular guys unprotected. But, we were just talking a little bit before about Vanacek, the Washington goaltender, who had a really good rookie year. There's a young guy that you would think the Seattle Kraken could have an interest in, because he's someone that can grow with your franchise.
And it depends on, everybody's different, how their scouting staff and management and Ron Francis evaluates Vanacek. Can he be a bona fide number one? Played pretty darn well last year, EJ, as a rookie that you mentioned. So that's one of those areas we'll see if maybe a guy like Vanacek and the Capitals make a deal. Do they want to keep him? I know they have Samsonov, but do they see Vanacek as part of their future, and do they have to maneuver to make sure that he does not get picked?
If they were willing to come to a deal with another team in the NHL for Vanacek, what teams would be in a position to acquire a goaltender like that?
Well, I think San Jose is one that comes to mind right away, because they've been seeking a goaltender to help with Martin Jones, who's on a longer-term contract. I think if Martin Jones goes on the unprotected list, I don't think the Seattle Kraken are going to be racing to the podium to add him with the contract circumstances. And he's struggled a lot over the last couple of years, although he led that team to a cup final when you go back to, I believe it was 2016 with the San Jose Sharks. So for me, that would be one team off the top of my head, maybe Pittsburgh, but San Jose seems like a team that would make some sense.
I agree there. They've had inconsistent goaltending in the last few years, and hoping Jones can maybe find it again, but it's been a few years where it's been just too inconsistent for the Sharks, and you cannot have that in this day and age of the competitive balance in the league. We know the importance of goaltending. They have to give you a chance to win on a nightly basis, or you're not going to be making the playoffs. And exactly what happened to the San Jose Sharks this season.
Well, how about out in Florida? Chris Driedger, a little bit of a different situation because he is a pending UFA here. But what do you see in his future? And is there any way that he becomes part of something in an expansion situation?
Well, he's an unrestricted free agent, so that makes him a little bit different. And if he will not be protected by Florida because of that. And then if he just, at that point, if he's not protected, the Seattle team could start to talk to Driedger on July the 18th. They could talk to all unprotected UFAs and RFAs on July 18th. They have a little bit of an edge there. But if there's a team, let's say the Pittsburgh Penguins, who struggled with the goaltending in the playoffs, let's say the Pittsburgh Penguins have identified Chris Driedger as someone they'd like to add. We saw this with the Montreal Canadiens last year. They traded for the rights to Joel Edmondson with the idea of getting ahead of unrestricted free agency. They identified Edmondson as somebody they wanted. They traded with Carolina for his rights, and then they signed him before he ever became a free agent. Again, hypothetically, let's say the Penguins have identified Driedger. They could trade something, a pick of some sort, to the Florida Panthers to get the rights, with the idea that we're going to sign this guy before he ever goes to market. So that's a situation that could play out for Driedger. But again, it's unique because he's an unrestricted free agent, and he's coming off a really good year.
He's coming off a really good year, and that's what the caveat of going into this expansion draft and so much maneuvering along the way. It'll be interesting. I always say it's tough to lose a draft pick. You got to know ahead of time. If we're pretty sure at least we're getting those negotiating rights a little early before he becomes an unrestricted free agent, we're going to get our man, like the Montreal Canadiens did in Edmondson. But that will be interesting to watch. I agree on Driedger for sure, because he was a real good goaltender this year for the Florida Panthers.
And it's in the interest of the Florida Panthers to, like, if there is a suitor for Driedger, it's in their interest to try to get something for him, because he can leave on July 28th when free agency
and you get
opens,
nothing.
And you get absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
So you are trying to facilitate that. If you're the Florida Panthers, probably you're having conversations with other managers. Would you be interested in his rights, and trying to find a team, identify a team, as I said, maybe Pittsburgh, maybe San Jose. Could be any number of teams that feel like they love Chris Driedger, and we'd like to get a crack at him early. And you saw what Marc Bergevin did. Signed a nice deal with Joel Edmondson, and Joel Edmondson helped them get to the Stanley Cup final.
Well, part of what makes this expansion draft so intriguing is that there's so much potential for big-name players to move, whether it's a trade or being unprotected. Here are some notable goaltenders who could be available. Take a look at some of these guys. I mean, Jake Allen, Braden Holtby, Anton Khudobin, who went to the Stanley Cup final last year. Jonathan Quick is an interesting one. Some of these guys are older, some of them are younger. I mean, Kaapo Kähkönen had a great start with the Minnesota Wild this year. You look at this board, what stands out to you, Eve?
Well, I mean, Kraken would be an interesting one. He had a couple of good years for Iowa in the American Hockey League. Came up, played well at the start, kind of slowed down at the end of the year, and you saw that Talbot played very well. So if he's available, I would think, again, if I'm Seattle, that might be a guy I'm looking at, but if you like him. But Matt Dumba could also be on that unprotected list as well, so he would be someone maybe you do something for a guy like that. But those older goaltenders, it sends a message, right, to the other teams in the league that perhaps they could be available via trade. The case of the Dallas Stars is tricky because they have Ben Bishop, who they're going to protect, and then Anton Khudobin, who they could leave unprotected. Quite frankly, with Ben Bishop, all of his injuries, I might protect Khudobin.
Seriously. No, that's a legitimate, I agree with you.
Yep. I'm getting
he's
word.
Got a no
move clause.
No move.
Yeah, see,
no
there you go. There's always something.
Beneficial for him because you're right. Yeah. He has played very little hockey the last 2+ years.
But the no move clause, and to the viewers out there, if you don't remember, when a player has a no move clause, you have to protect him.
Yeah.
So there was an interesting case in Edmonton with Milan Lucic, who had a no move clause. He worked with the team because he likes it there, for the Calgary Flames, excuse me, he was with Edmonton. He worked with the team on that, and he was willing to waive that so they didn't have to protect him because he wants to stay there with the Flames. So, we'll see how it plays out.
Really quick, because we have a 3-time champion defenseman on the show. No. How about defensemen that could be available here leading up to the expansion draft?
Well, I looked at Carolina and Brady Shea. I mean, he's a great skating defenseman. He could really add something to a team if, in fact, Carolina's going to get nothing for him, and, in fact, thinking he might be the guy picked off their list for the Seattle team that possibly some team might be interested. I like Brady Shea. He can skate. He's got size. He's very mobile on the back end. But you look at, there's all kinds of good ones on the board there, really, that are good defensemen. But for me, I wanted to say, with all this maneuverability and when you're building a team, and there's so much that goes into it with Ronnie Francis' staff and not being able to see players live and in person, certainly last year because of COVID and everything else, and their scouts not being able to go. Character. You want guys that want to be there, so they really have to do their homework as far as, you want skill, but you want guys that want to be part of the foundation, building something together. Vegas did it pretty quickly.
Yeah. Keep an eye on Caleb Jones, too, with Seth Jones being in the mix to maybe move.